This is a very long story, and I'm not the best at writing things out, but I'll try. I live in Georgia, the state, in a rural town not too far from a major city. There's a set of woods that's behind our house, and it divides two neighbourhoods, and it's about a mile wide, if that. Strange occurrences have always surrounded these woods. Small things like random trash, tarps, etc. I should mention, it's more swampy marsh than woods, so it makes camping in there impossible. One night, I was taking our dog out. He stays in the back half of the house due to him not liking the other dogs. I took him out the side door and walked around the house to the fence. For some reason, when we left the house, he was absolutely terrified. He didn't want to go out. Very unusual for a dog who's quick to snatch someone's soul if prompted. Not thinking about it, we pushed onward. After he tinkled, we walked back. This is when I noticed it, or rather, heard it. Crunching of leaves. At first, I thought it was one of our dozen cats on the property, until I realised it was matching my steps. If I walked, you could hear it walking. If I stopped, it stopped. There's a small clearing between woods where one of the sheds is. That's when we saw it. My dog was first to see something, and then I saw some, creature. It was taller than the shed, so maybe a good 8 feet tall, and it darted across the clearing at a crazy fast speed. My dog, who again isn't scared of anything, bolts so fast, I dropped his leash and he ran to the door whining. I was quickly behind him. Once we were inside, I quickly bolted the door and ran to tell my girlfriend what happened. She immediately wanted to investigate, saying it's probably a woodland creature. Armed with 2 flashlights, we went out the front door. As we walked toward the woodline, we could hear something moving around. It sounded maybe 200 yards away. As we scanned with our flashlights, we saw nothing but kept hearing it. Then we heard it get closer and closer until it was maybe 20 feet away. Still nothing. No eyes, not even an animal call. Just rustling. My girlfriend, now scared, heads for the house. I decided to check with the neighbours to see if maybe one of their dogs got out. When I arrived at his house, my neighbour, who we'll call Dave, explained that all his dogs were accounted for. Curious, he came to investigate. This is when I noticed that whatever this thing was, following me along the woodline to Dave's house, and was now behind Dave's house. Gun in hand, we went into his backyard scanning for something. We could hear it rustling or maybe running. About 100 yards away in thick, swampy woods. Way too thick for a person to walk in, let alone run in. Then it stopped. It was dead silent. Scanning and on edge, we hear and see nothing, and then bam! All of a sudden, it was 5 feet in front of us, sprinting at me. It slammed the fence so hard, it rocked it back and forth. Dave, scared shitless, shot randomly as well. Nothing. We never saw it. Never had it got close to us. Again, as I mentioned, the woods are thick. Too thick to run in, so what the fuck teleported silently in front of us and slammed the gate? Spooked, we were about to run. Then we heard it. It was human in nature, but not English. It sounded alien-like. Not a known language. Dave, a hunter for the last 40 years, still to this day can't explain what that was. Anyway, after we heard that, we bolted. He covered me and I ran to my house. Not 10 minutes later, we both hear a loud explosion coming from the woods. It shook our houses and flickered our power. I ran outside to see what it was, and of course, nothing. But when Dave came out and confirmed he felt the same thing, we were both once again terrified. Moments later, a few strangers from the neighbourhood came driving down to our cul-de-sac, and they all agreed the blast sound they heard came from behind our house. 911 was called, and the 2 police officers interviewed us separately. Our stories matched. The responding officers refused to go anywhere near those woods. They took the reports and left. To this day, we're still not sure what that encounter was. Also, Dave doesn't go outside at night anymore. It spooked him that bad. It was already dark in the late afternoon when my brother and I arrived in the small town of Grand Rapids, Minnesota. It was December and bitterly cold. The reason for the visit was to spend Christmas with our grandma. She was well into her 90s, so it was reasonable to assume each holiday would be the last. As it happened, this one was. I'm the youngest of four brothers. At the time, I was living in Minneapolis. My parents also lived there, but they were splitting their time between Minnesota and Arizona. Currently, they were in Phoenix and hadn't planned to return to Minnesota for the holidays. Knowing our grandma would be alone, I had called my brother in Chicago and suggested he grab me so we could head up north together, where our grandma had been staying at an assisted living centre. The trip was uneventful, and we had a pleasant Christmas Eve, doing puzzles and chatting with our grandma. As the night came to a close, we headed to our lodgings. My brother had made the accommodations beforehand. We'd be staying at the Rainbow Motel. The motel itself was unremarkable. It wasn't old, and it didn't appear foreboding from outside. Our room was clean and furnished with what you would expect: beds, a desk, some chairs, a television on a cabinet, and a small bathroom. I'd call it your standard cookie-cutter roadside motel. The room was fairly small. 2 beds lay side by side, with the door at roughly the foot of one of the beds. This was the bed my brother selected, so mine was a little bit further away from the door, but only perhaps 7 to 8 feet. The motel was mostly empty, probably due to the holiday and it being the dead of winter. After checking in, we headed down to the bar, which only had a couple other people in it. At the time, I was partial to White Russians, and I had one that evening as a nightcap. We finished our drinks and headed back to the room. We knew we had a long drive the next day. I was tired, got undressed and flopped onto my bed. My brother decided to watch TV. I wasn't interested, so I rolled over and closed my eyes. I don't remember when it started, but I want to say it was only a few moments after I had lain down. It was only this. The door handle suddenly began to shake quite aggressively. I recall thinking this was strange, because it didn't sound like someone had mistaken this room for theirs and simply tried to open the door. The handle was being deliberately, violently shaken. I sat up and looked at the door, and then my brother. After a couple seconds, it stopped. We looked at each other, gave a collective shrug, and lay back down. Soon, the noise started up again. Now, I could understand someone, after a few glasses of eggnog, getting their room number wrong and trying the door to enter. But this was different. It was forceful. It was clear to me the intention was not to open the door, but instead to let the person inside know that someone was out there. I thought perhaps it was kids playing a prank. I hadn't seen anyone in the motel, and it was well past 11 p.m, so it seemed odd that any children would be allowed to roam the halls. I got up and walked over to the door. We had heard no voices, no giggles, no closing doors or retreating footsteps. I looked out the door's peephole, which gave a decent view of the hallway, but saw no one. I opened the door and leaned out. Our room was near the centre of the hall, and I could see the exits on both ends. I recall there was a hallway that split off, perhaps 20 feet down to my left. I assumed this is where the prankers retreated to, as there wouldn't be enough time for them to run down the entire hallway and out of one of the exits, or enter another room without us hearing a door to another room close. I looked for some other explanation. Was the door itself somehow causing the sound? Was it loose, and perhaps the wind or the pressure of the structure was making it shake? I closed the door and pushed it. It was very solid. I couldn't replicate the sounds, except by grabbing the handle and vigorously shaking it. This was getting annoying. I was tired and just wanted to sleep. I climbed back into bed, but I lay there like a coiled spring, waiting for whoever was pranking us to return. I'd enjoy catching them in the act if they did. Sure enough, moments later the shaking started up again. I sprung up and was at the door in an instant and looked out the peephole again, certain to see some kids running down the hallway. But I saw no one. From the time the noise stopped to the time I was at the door was a couple seconds at most. The only way I couldn't have seen or heard someone was if they were smart enough to crouch down, knowing I couldn't see anything directly under the peephole. I opened the door. No one was there. No one had been there. My brother and I are both skeptics. We were certain there was a reasonable explanation for this. But truth be told, I was beginning to get a little spooked. I had never experienced anything like this. It seemed to defy logic. Once again, I crawled into bed. But I was so unnerved, sleep seemed out of the question. I was upset I hadn't caught the pranksters, but was also dimly aware that there were none to be caught. Something was making this happen. Something unseen. Someone with a purpose. It scared me. I recall making a conscious decision to will the noise to stop. I closed my eyes tightly and focused on the thought. I don't want this to happen anymore. Enough. You've made your point, whatever it might have been. Stop now. And it did. The door rattler didn't return. After a while, I relaxed a little. My brother shut off the TV and turned out the lights. The silence of the room was complete. However, as the night wore on, I found myself woken up by other noises. I could hear the door chain moving. I could hear other unidentifiable sounds at the door. I didn't hear the door handle noise again, but all through the night, I was subjected to the repeated sounds of the door being fiddled with in some manner. A pattern emerged. I'd hear a sound, become terrified, it would stop, and I would drift off to sleep again. In the morning, my brother and I discussed what might have happened. All he would say was that we had visitors, and in the bright light of day, it all seemed a bit silly. What it might have been seemed not very important. I just wanted to go home. We checked out the hotel and got on the road. Several hours later, we approached Minneapolis, the skyline looming in the distance. Not long after that, my brother dropped me at my apartment and he carried on to Chicago. As I shifted back into my life, I placed the incident behind me and, aside from telling a few close friends, I simply moved on. A few months passed and I went to visit my older brother who was living in Arizona. Years before, he'd lived in Grand Rapids and knew the Rainbow Motel, although he had never stayed there. I told him the story. All the while, he smiled at me as I related the story. It was a knowing smile that I at first mistook for disbelief. When I was done, he then told me our other brother, the one who had been in the motel with me, had recently visited and related the same story to him. I didn't know this. He said our stories were essentially identical. I'd not spoken to him since he had dropped me off at my apartment. The next thing he said chilled me. As I've mentioned, he'd lived in Grand Rapids years before and naturally was very familiar with the town. He told me the Rainbow Motel, the place I found so plain and average, had a history of hauntings. I assume he had gotten this information from the locals he encountered while living there years ago. While my oldest brother likes to joke and tease, he is for the most part a stoic Midwesterner, not given to nonsense or deception. I believed him. Now, obviously, if I had been aware of this beforehand, and the events of that night had played out as they had, I'd no doubt believe it was our imagination that were to blame. But the fact that this motel was so unassuming, the location so mundane, and the building so very unremarkable, leads me to believe that whatever happened that night was not something that had simply sprung from our imaginations. I'm still a skeptic. I like to think this could be explained without resorting to the supernatural. What I do know is this: it was real. I was terrifying, and I will never forget this experience. When I was young, I had a plethora of problems at night when it came to sleeping. I'd sleepwalk, sleep talk, scream in my sleep, have full conversations I wouldn't recall with my eyes open with family members, night terrors, I'd see figures in the dark, and frequently wake up mid-conversation in my empty bedroom, swearing that someone was beside me. Typically when this happened, it would seem like I was answering a question, and I'd be very confused when I realized nobody was with me. I also had these strange dreams where everything would be black, and it was just me and this same girl I didn't know, and it would seem like we were communicating telepathically. They had strong emotions in them, and although there were big gaps in between them, I would think about them for very long bursts. I'd refer to her as the lake house girl, and she seemed pretty sad. The dreams with her, although infrequent, have continued into adulthood. The last happened 6 years ago, with her continuously telling me to look in the basement. I turn 28 next week. These things all occurred for me from the age of 4 to 5, to the age of 12 to 13. I also wet the bed during this time, and a good majority of the time I recall being awake when it would happen, but just being too terrified to make the movement to go to the bathroom. My sister had all of the same issues that I did. She's 8 years older than me, although her bedwetting lasted until she hit the age of 16. I've been told by my mom that I had some of these issues prior to my remembering them, but obviously, although I have a few memories from a very young age, I don't recall them. The main thing that's always stuck with me about this time period was me seeing things in the hallway. It would happen almost nightly for a really long stretch of time, and it lasted for at least a few years, then got less frequent. At the time I was 6, and my mom was going through chemotherapy, and my home life was fairly traumatic. My bedroom was at the end of the hall, to the left, and I had a bunk bed that I'd sleep on the top bunk on. It faced the hallway, and the first night I'd started seeing things. I requested a nightlight because I'd gone the whole night without falling asleep. It would always start with a sinking feeling, and my attention would go straight to my door that led out into the hallway. I'd sense something there, and then I'd begin seeing shadowy figures slowly creeping towards my doorway. Some seemed like they had hoods over their heads, and others not. I don't recall ever making out facial features. They'd get to the doorway and then just deteriorate, but there would always be a steady line of them, and they would just keep coming. I'd brought it up to my parents a few times, and between that and the sleepwalking and screaming, my mom took me to the doctor, and they just told her I had night terrors and sent us on our way. When I'd bring it more, my parents would just get angry, so I kept quiet about it and only talked about it occasionally with my sister. One night, it got particularly bad, and the figures were making it through the doorway, and I started screaming uncontrollably, and my dad got mad and came in and unplugged my nightlight and locked me inside my room. I sat there terrified for a while, and a shadow appeared on my wall, but didn't move. Then I got the sinking feeling 100 times worse than I'd ever had it before, and it felt as though my room fell away from the house altogether, along with the world as I knew it at that. I started seeing these little imp-like creatures all around my room in the darkness, along with something hanging outside of my window. I have little splotches of memories of this night that I still recall, but I've blacked out large portions of it, probably due to how bad it messed me up for a long time. I met a girl some years ago and had some similar experiences, and it sparked my interest in adulthood, and so far fairy folklore, little people/little brother stories, and some cases of alien abductions and sleep paralysis have had some eerily similar details and brought back some memories. Anyone else have any experiences similar to this? I think I had sleep paralysis occasionally, but some of the experiences, including the really intense night, didn't seem to be that to me, but I suppose that it wouldn't seem that way. Although I do recall moving the night I got locked in my room. We would also go to a cabin at the Lake of the Ozarks every weekend, starting when I was 6, and I'd only see one figure there a few times on its own, but I would occasionally wake up knee-deep in the lake, just staring off into the water or towards the end of the cove. I had always thought it was connected to the lake for some reason, and a few years back, my family replaced the electrical there, and they found a very old German doll head in the attic, with 2 candles beside it. The attic is so small that you'd pretty much have to be a child to really go up there. Before we got the cabin, my grandfather on my dad's side owned it, and he hadn't gone down there in 17 years, so I'm unsure whether it was up there from someone who'd been squatting there, or if it had been up there from the family my grandpa bought it from. They were the Willis family, and they built the cabin themselves, and their family cemetery is a few miles from the cabin, that I only got to visit when I was 6, but I plan to go back soon. I've always referred to 17 as my lucky number prior to us getting the lake house too. Unsure if that is significant or not, but it feels like it might be. When I was in high school, there was a lot of local folklore about a man who allegedly shot and killed his wife and daughter before taking his own life in their family home. The incident occurred many years prior in a now abandoned 2-story home, located between 2 wheat fields. I grew up in the boonies, so it was quite common for old farmhouses to be built in such a manner. The year was 2001, and my senior year had just begun a couple months prior. I don't remember the exact month, but I'm assuming October because I remember the crisp, cool autumn air had just rolled upon us. One evening, a group of about 8 or so friends and I decided we would visit the infamous home and scope it out for kicks. Before leaving my house, I had the idea I would play a prank on my pals, which involved a small bottle of red food colouring. I placed the food colouring in my pocket, locked my bedroom door, and left to meet up with the gang. We arrived at the location in 2 separate cars. One car was packed with the guys. The other car was driven by one of our female classmates and 2 of her girlfriends. The house was situated on a slight hill, which met a gravel driveway. We parked our cars in the driveway in front of the home's garage and began our trek up the hill. The very first thing I noticed was a very sad, dead-looking tree in the middle of the yard. The grass felt very strange beneath my feet, quite spongy and soft, as though it was rotted with disease. This particular stood out to me because I had never felt grass quite like this before, especially without any recent rain. The house was completely boarded up with plywood, but there was a small opening in the front door, which appeared to be broken from a previous visitor. Equipped with our flashlights, we began scoping out the interior of the home, searching for any evidence a murder actually took place. The interior was decorated with dingy floral wallpaper. The floors were bare hardwood throughout. In the main entryway, we saw what appeared to be blood splatters where the wall met the ceiling, and several apparent gunshot holes. I'm a skeptic by nature and thought it could have possibly been faked by previous visitors to feed into the lore. Whichever the case, the blood appeared a very dull brown colour, indicating it had been there for a very long time. We walked up a set of creaky steps to the upstairs, which featured 2 bedrooms. One room had an old metal bed frame and bare mattress, but was otherwise empty. I can't remember if I entered the second room or not. We all stood in one of the bedrooms, talking and expressing our predictions as to what we believed happened before making our way back down the stairs. We continued exploring the main level, living space and dining before reaching the kitchen. I noticed there was a door leading from the kitchen to a small breezeway behind the house. I was the first to check it out and knew this was the time to pull off my prank. As I entered the breezeway, I reached into my pocket, tilted my head back, and filled my entire eye socket with the red food colouring. I banged my flashlight against the wall to create a loud thud, fell to the ground and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Fuck! Something just hit me! Go, go, go!" We all bolted from the house at top speed. One of the girls even stumbled down the hill and collided with her passenger door. I entered the backseat of her car holding my eye, screaming with my hands and face covered in fake blood. I remember the girl in the passenger seat yelling over and over, "Get him to the ER! Get him to the ER! His eyes are gone!" They frantically drove about 15 to 20 minutes to the nearest hospital as I writhed in pain in the back seat. The entire ride I was wailing, "Something hit me. I don't know what it was. What the fuck just happened?" We finally got to the hospital parking lot with the other car right behind us. Everyone got out and we began swiftly walking to the entrance before I let out a maniacal laugh to reveal it was all a prank. A couple of the girls were pretty pissed, but the guys completely lost it and couldn't stop laughing. After several minutes, the mood lightened, and the other girls finally sought humour in the situation. Overall, it was a hit. I got home late that night and cleaned up for school the next morning. When I woke up, everything felt completely off. I kept hearing what sounded like incessant whispering ringing in my ears. It reminded me of the sound of people whispering in church or at a funeral, with the sound of the letter S resonating the most. I walked over to my closet to grab a t-shirt and noticed a freezing cold spot in my room, just in front of my closet door. Our house didn't have central air, only heating vents in the floor, so this frigid spot made absolutely zero sense. I opened my closet door and every single piece of clothing was laying in a ball on the floor. I was dumbfounded because I locked my door before I left and always hung up my clothes, even my t-shirts. My house was empty that morning because my mom worked the 12-hour night shifts, and my little brother spent the night at our cousin's house because I knew I wouldn't get home until late the night before. As I walked downstairs to my living room, the whispering sounds intensified. Goosebumps covered my arm and my heart started to pound. I grew very alarmed as I realised this was more than just morning cobwebs or grogginess. I drove to school and the whispering sounds wouldn't stop. I thought I was completely losing my mind, so I pulled one of my friends, who was a devout Christian, into the restroom and started crying. I told him I thought maybe I was haunted due to my antics from the night before. I tried my best to explain the situation, but I caught him off guard and I didn't feel like he was taking me seriously. As the school day went on, the whispering sounds persisted, and my friends who were there for the shenanigans couldn't stop talking about my prank. I did my best to hold myself together and not reveal that anything was wrong. I didn't want that kind of attention, and especially didn't want them to think I was crazy, since the heart-to-heart with my Christian friend didn't go the way I anticipated. When the school day ended, I immediately checked my room and still felt the freezing cold spot in front of my closet. I truly believed at this point I was without a doubt being haunted. A few days went by, and as I was having great difficulty sleeping, I kept seeing or envisioning a dark shadow in the corner of my room, about the height of a small child. I did my best to ignore it as the shadow man began to move from one spot to the other, eventually standing directly beside where I rested my head. The following day, I told my mom about my visit to the abandoned house and the prank I pulled on my friends. She was very disappointed I would disrespect the alleged murder victims, but she was also very supportive in me finding help. She's very spiritual and recommended I meet with a church member to get cleansed and also have my room cleansed. I didn't and still don't subscribe to religion the slightest. However, at this point, I was desperate. I went to the church and bared my soul to a priest, expressing sorrow for my actions, for fooling my friends, entering the abandoned house, and exploiting victims for my personal amusement. Later that evening, a member of the church came to my house. lit candles and said a prayer in my bedroom. The next day, no more cold spots, no more audible whispering. After a week of feeling absolutely insane, it seemed to be over. About a month later, I developed a very deep depression. I began feeling incredibly dark emotions I had never felt before. These feelings would continue to grow through the winter and into spring of 2002 when baseball season rolled around. I was a lifelong baseball player who was being recruited by a few schools in the area. I was so depressed, I opted not to play, forfeiting any possible chance at a scholarship and thus ending my baseball career. I strongly regret today. I had simply lost interest in everything other than sleeping. I shut out my friends, parents, pretty much everyone for the next couple months. By the time graduation rolled around, I ended up rekindling a friendship with one of my early childhood friends. He and I played baseball together back in the first grade and were best friends in grade school. We kind of drifted apart over the years, but something drew us back together and we hung out all summer. The stronger our friendship became, the less apparent my depression was. It ultimately fizzled out by fall, and I ended up attending college out of state. 20 years later, the whispers haven't come back. No cold spots, no dark shadows, nothing. All put to rest. I haven't thought about my haunting in a very long time, but this past year it's crept up from time to time. No bad feelings, just memories. I've been wanting to tell this story for the past couple months to hopefully aid anyone who may be experiencing something similar. Whether it was a true supernatural experience or my own fears projected into reality, I needed help, and I'm so very thankful I spoke up. Thanks especially to my mother, who pushed aside her disappointment to ensure her son was okay. If you're feeling off, please ask for help, no matter how silly your problems may sound. Peace. I had this experience about 2 years ago. I didn't think to write it down, simply because I did not think much of it, and there was much story to it in general. Some may argue that this experience was sleep paralysis, but I strongly disagree. It was very real. I was able to move and everything during this strange encounter. Normally, the experiences I've had in this house have been of the ghostly variety. Nothing majorly noteworthy, but if there is interest, I can make a separate post for that as well. This was definitely not that. It started with me waking up in the middle of the night to my pet rat squeaking. I assumed, of course, that they were playing and got one upset at the other, so I sat up. I turned to my right to investigate their cage, which is quite close to my bed, only to see something I never expected. It was a creature that I've seen and heard of from others, but never thought I'd ever see one myself. It was about 3 feet tall, based on my rat's cage that it stood next to, which was about 6 feet tall. It had a large bulbous head, dark grey skin and big eyes. I knew that it was grey quite quickly. His skin seemed so smooth, with no flaw in his flesh at all. It even had a slight pearlescence to it that shined in the moonlight that peeked through my blinds. His eyes didn't have a pupil, at least not that I could tell. They were also grey, yet I think there was a tinge of green. There were these strange squiggles and specks in the eyes, almost reminding me of space itself. Then, nothing happened. Or rather, I woke up the next morning. I'm almost certain he made me go back to sleep. I'm not sure who he was interested in, me or my rats. They were just fine when I checked in on them the next morning. No one was missing, and I didn't feel different myself. I know this is a short story, but like I said, not much did happen. I didn't feel like I was in danger, but I still wonder what that was about in general. Sometimes I wonder if creatures like that just know you are interested in them. I think that may have been why I saw one. Thank you for reading my short story. I know it's not as exciting as some others, but it has been churning in my brain for a while now. I'm a pretty scientifically minded person, not really spiritual either. I'm open-minded to the possibility of things I can't explain, but I'm not a seeker of the paranormal or spiritual events. However, I have very strong memories from when I was young about a boy who claimed to be my guardian angel come to visit me in my room. My white blinds would turn a pale green and purple colour, and he would appear like an old film on my wall. Even had the spots that would appear like watching an old film. I talked to him regularly about all sorts of things. I remember I was going to change bedrooms, and I was worried he wouldn't come to my new room, but that wasn't an issue. His name was Mark, and I think he said he was 7 years old and had died in a car accident. He showed me his accident. Not violent and gross, but enough to let me know what happened. He looked the same each time with dark hair and a long-sleeved striped shirt with a collar. He was like talking to a good friend or an older brother. The last time he came to visit me, I was really tired and told him that I didn't want to talk. He tried really hard to keep me talking, but I ignored him and rolled over. I told him to leave me alone and I was annoyed with him. He never showed up again, and I always felt really sad about it. Even now, I feel like I'm missing someone. I asked my mom what it meant if a person talked to angels. I was really hesitant to tell her because I didn't want to change anything or have him stop coming. I know I was young when I asked the question. I had a hard time trying to figure out how to ask it and what words to use. Maybe 3 years old. He continued to visit until I was maybe 6. I remember he was older than me. Has anyone heard of anything similar? I have a hard time remembering more than highlights about these events. I've never shared them with anyone before. I just found myself remembering them and feeling sad and a sense of loss. I'd like to talk to him again and find out what was actually happening. It's unexplainable to me. The easy answer is I dreamed it, but I know I didn't. I've never heard of a similar experience. Google has never been a help. It turns out religious searches are finding one's guardian angel or whatever. I was just hoping for some possible insight. Feel like asking questions or anything. I honestly just have felt a loss, and sometimes it hits me hard. Tonight, I can't sleep, about 30 years later, because I keep wondering about him and who he was. Thanks for reading. I was sitting in my room in front of my laptop, talking with my friends on a Zoom call. A minute was left of 2020. We all counted down as smiles spread on our faces. We thought that things would be better next year. Everyone did. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! All of us shouted as the clock hit 12. The date, 32nd of December. I thought it was a glitch with my phone. I checked my laptop to find the same date. Everyone's face on the call had a confused expression. Guys, I think there's a glitch on my devices, Gary said. Everyone repeated the same thing after him. All our devices had the same date. I turned on the TV, and in the corner of the screen was the same date. What the fuck? I muttered to myself. The news channel was chaotic when I turned it on. Everyone was moving around the set of the local news channel as reports came in about the date. People in my streets got out of their houses and raced back and forth to their neighbours' houses. A call came on my phone. Guys, I've got to go. I left the Zoom meeting and answered the call. Reports are now coming in from all over the town that the date is not 1st of January 2021, but 32nd of December 2020. I silenced the TV and answered the call. Blake, we need you here, a raspy voice said. Why? What happened? Something. I can't tell you like this. Come at 24th Street. I tried to ask him further about the situation, but he ended the call. Not like I have a choice, I thought. I put on my uniform and headed to the address he gave me. There were 2 police cars and an ambulance parked outside a house with tapes surrounding the whole perimeter. What's happening? I asked an officer as I approached the house. Oh, Blake, ask him. He pointed to a man standing at the door, wearing a hat and a white trench coat. Drew, I called out to the man. What the hell's going on? Blake, he turned around and took his hat off. Hell if I know. Why'd you call me? I asked. Well, you see, it's hard to explain. Hell, it's impossible to explain. Look here. He pointed to the ambulance. As it was closing its doors, I saw a man in there with a missing arm. See that man? Now come inside, he said, as he walked towards the door. Inside, there was nothing. What's here? I asked. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's like no one even lives here, right? I nodded. Well then, come upstairs. I followed him up there. I felt like something was off here at this place. It just felt weird. Upstairs, there was furniture, a kid's room, an attic in which stuff was kept. What the fuck? What the fuck indeed, Drew said after me. And that man you just saw riding away, you saw how his arm was cut off, right? Well, there are no remains of a cut off arm here. I turned my head to him in confusion. The hell you mean? Did you check properly? Thrice in the whole neighbourhood. I scratched my head in confusion. Well, how did his arm come off? Who cut it off? No one. Jesus, stop with the riddles and get to the damn point, I said with irritation. This family was in the living room, he said, as he sat down on the bed, celebrating New Year like everyone else did. When the clock struck 12, everyone supposedly disappeared. What? I asked with furrowed brows. The man that was standing outside the door with his arm inside, and as everything disappeared in the room, so did his arm. Are you on drugs? I asked, because whatever the hell you're saying isn't making any damn sense. Well then let me ask you this. Where is his arm? He said, with a slightly raised voice. And while you're at it, remember that it's the 32nd of December today, which is literally impossible. I didn't know what to say. Well, there wasn't actually anything to say. Everything happened was actually impossible. Blake, come in. My radio crackled with life as Jane spoke from the other end. What is it? Go to 19th Lane. I think you might want to see what happened there. I looked at Drew and he nodded. We both got in his car and drove away. We reckon the riots will start pretty soon, and there will definitely be people thinking this is the end of the world. Drew thought something else. What makes you think it's not the end? I asked. It's hard to explain. I need you to trust me. It's not the end just yet. I never really knew what was going on in his mind, but I knew that knows a hell of a lot more than I do. We arrived at the address given. We went in, and there was yet again nobody or nothing. I heard a loud bang from their house and went to make sure they were okay, but there was no one in there, the neighbour who found the house like this told us. We have to stop this from going on the news, Drew said, as we walked away from the house. I don't think it will. We've only found 2 houses like this. We have, he interrupted me, but we have to assume that there's more happening like this across the town. I heard a ping from my phone and pulled it out of my pocket to see what it was. Well, you wouldn't be wrong about that, I said to Drew as I showed him the news article on my phone. Strange disappearances spotted in the town of... Thankfully, it was our local news article, so it probably didn't get out to people out of here. Well, fuck, he sighed. He pulled out his phone and warned Jane about the riots and to prepare teams to get it under control. He was surprisingly right. Riots started an hour later, with people raiding stores and hoarding every little thing they could get their hands on. How do you know about the riots? I asked him. Well, that's a question for another day. Let me drop you home. Aren't we going to the station to give the report? There's no need for that. No one's there at this moment, he said. I always tried asking him how he knew all these things, but he didn't budge. After Drew dropped me off, I decided to have some sleep. I figured it wasn't long before he would call me again. I woke up to blaring alarms and red and blue lights shining through my window. I checked my clock, 12:43 p.m. I got dressed to go outside and already found Drew sitting at my table, pouring himself a cup of whiskey which was kept in the fridge. How the hell did you... I didn't finish my sentence. He already knew what I was going to say. You left your window open. He finished the whiskey and kept the glass on the table. Let's go. There was no one in my neighbour's house. It was just like the previous night. Everyone and everything disappeared. What happened to the man who lost his arm? I asked as I remembered him. He's nowhere to be found. Security says they didn't see anyone leave, and if he had jumped out the window, he wouldn't have survived for long. I held my head in my hands. What the hell is happening? Why is all this happening? There has to be some stop to it. Breathe, Drew said, as I kept his hand on my shoulder. We'll put an end to this. Just don't overthink it. After I calmed down a bit, I asked him, has this happened anywhere else? While pointing to the house. In the morning? Yes, 8 more places. I raised my head to face him. His face was calm, even in a situation like this, while I was sweating all over the place. Hey, tell me, is there a pattern to these disappearances? I asked. Nope. As far as I know, they're completely random. Then that means that this could happen to us too. Precisely. I sighed. How could he do that with so much certainty and calmness? The rest of the day was spent at the station, seeing reports about different disappearances and riots all over the city. I asked Drew, as I always do, how he knows what will happen and how he stays so calm, even in a situation like this. His answer was the same as always. You'll know when the time comes. That night when I went to bed, I checked the date once again. 33rd of December. Maybe I'll wake up from this nightmare. I woke up to a rumbling sound coming from within the walls. The walls were shaking vigorously. I thought I was dreaming for a moment. I tried getting up from my bed, but I couldn't. It was like my weight had increased so much that my body couldn't handle it. My eyelids started to drop as I felt my breath being obstructed by something. I wheezed for air as I finally blacked out. It only felt like it was black for a moment, until I woke up again on the ground in a white enclosure. Hello there, a voice called out from behind me. There was a man sitting on a chair with his arms and legs crossed. He wore a navy-coloured suit with a white shirt and a red tie. Who are you? I asked, while looking around simultaneously. It seemed like there was no door or window in this room. I'm the one you call God. What? I stuttered. Was I really standing in front of God? Let's get this over with. I have to answer some of your questions before you move on. Ask away. Move on where? I asked. Am I dead? You have 2 choices. Either become our slave for 1,000 years, or get in the shuffler, where your soul will be reshuffled. Your identity will be torn apart, and a new one will be made, he said, ignoring my second question. I raised my hand to ask, but stopped. If he really is God, I'm going to guess he doesn't have much time. On top of that, he said to answer some of my questions. That means I'll have to choose them carefully. After much thinking, I asked, what's happening on Earth? Why has 2021 not arrived? A grin spread across his face. Finally, someone asked. He snapped his fingers and a board appeared in an instant. There's a pandemic going on Earth right now. As he spoke, some foreign writings appeared on the board. And pandemics usually come every century. Every century, my higher-ups give me a year to cause deaths. I mean, I usually cause deaths, but I have a year in which I can kill as many people as I want, to get the maximum energy for our world, without disturbing the balance of both our worlds. His higher-ups? I thought he was God. So why does he take orders from others? 2020 was one of them. The deaths this year were low. Lower than the higher-ups expected. Because of this, I had to increase the days of December to get the required amount of energy. He finally snapped his fingers and the board disappeared. What do you mean by energy and your world? I asked. Oh, that. We created your world because our world needed energy. Once upon a time, our world was in ruins, with dark wizards taking the energy for themselves. We had a wizard on our side that helped us create your world, and your deaths gave us that much needed energy to survive. And you caused deaths how? Plagues, old people, organ failures, stuff like that. Then how the hell am I here? Am I dead? He had a look of shame on his face. To get the demanded energy, I have to use the magic of our world to get you to this plane. Normal death would take time, granted that they are guaranteed. I have to ignore the rules to get the demanded energy. It's the only way they won't change me. I was angry. He just killed us to take energy for his own world? I didn't think God would be like this, just killing people for his own sake. And, am I fucking dead or not? I shouted, letting my anger leak out. No, not yet. I glanced at him. I was standing in front of God himself. How was I not dead? This method I use, it takes a little while to kill the person by itself. Not like the natural ways which guarantee a death, but take time. I have to make sure that by this method people do die. And I have done just that till now. And I will keep doing that until I satisfy the higher-ups. He had a maniacal look to him. He didn't look like that when I first saw him minutes ago. Well, choose, he boomed out as I was about to ask another question. Servitude or the shuffler? Wait, I said as I took some steps back from him. You have 10 seconds. He stood up and started coming towards me. Choose. Those 10 seconds passed in an instant as I contemplated between the two and thought of a way to get out at the same time. He jumped at me and covered my face with his hand. A burning sensation took over me as I screamed in pain and wriggled to get out, but he held me in place. He got off of me in an instant. The burning sensation went away, but my face still pained and it hurt to open my left eye. I looked at him. He looked scared as he crawled on the ground, looking into the air while hyperventilating. The white enclosure seemed like it was glitching as the ground and the floor started disappearing and appearing. What's going on? I asked him. Drew, he said. You know Drew, don't you? What about him? How do you know him? I caught him once, many years ago. Managed to get away. Lucky bastard. He caught Drew? How did he meet Drew? How the hell did he get out of this place? A strange rumbling started. It sounded like the one I heard in my bedroom. How did you meet Drew? I asked him. He was looking behind me while sweating. He was really nervous, judging by his looks. I looked behind. A door appeared, which looked exactly like my bedroom's. Hey, stop. You want to know about Drew? I'll tell you. Just stay right there. I had two choices. Either learn about Drew right now, or go back and ask it himself. I knew the latter won't work, and he'll turn me around in riddles again. But the former seemed like it'll kill me if I stayed around to ask him questions. He looked exhausted and scared for some reason. I decided what I had to do. I started walking towards my door. I felt a great force pulling me backwards, but I didn't stop. I crawled towards the door and opened it. A bright white light blinded me. I woke up in my bed as sunlight streamed in through the windows. I immediately shot up, scanning my surroundings. It seemed like I was really in my house, away from the white room. I looked at the date. 1st of January 2021. Were all those days a mere dream? I got out of bed and went to the bathroom and saw some dull burn marks on my face. It looked like a hand's shape. So it wasn't a dream, I thought. Then that means... I heard a knock on my door. I dressed up and went to answer it. Drew was standing outside with 2 cups of coffee in his hands. Morning. I invited him and he sat down on the couch. Were you taken by God someday? I asked without hesitation. For the first time in my life, I saw him, for a few seconds, with a dumbfounded face. As he came to realize what happened, he said, "Yes, many years ago." "How did you come back into this world?" "Well, how did you?" He spun my question around. "Well, I think he made some kind of mistake. The white room started glitching and a door appeared. My door." Drew had a smile stretching across his face. "And?" "And he looked scared," I said. "And he knew you. He became scared only after knowing that I knew you." He chuckled. "You'll know why he was like that one day," he said. "Come on, why the hell do you not tell things straightforwardly?" I asked. "Do you really want to know?" he asked, as he finished his coffee and kept the cup on the table. I actually didn't want to know. Figured I wanted to wait, get a break after all that end of the year stuff. "And how is it the 1st of January today?" I asked. "It was the 33rd yesterday." "It was, and it's the 1st today. Don't worry, the riots have stopped, and we have it under control." "Wait, who's we?" "I know some certain people who can control situations like this," he said. "You know what? When the time's right, I'll introduce you to them. And the people that disappeared, I think they are dead." "You're right," he said, "but nothing we can do about it now. As far as our town knows, they're missing." "Wait, this didn't happen worldwide?" "Nope, only our town. I think they found something special about our town, but I don't know what." I tried to ask more, but he gave me the "don't ask more" look. I had many questions, but I believed that Drew would tell me about it someday, or I'll come to know about it, like I did today. "Sir, I think you might want to see this," the radio crackled to life with Jane's voice and gave us an address. Drew looked at me. "Want to take a look at it?" A smile spread across my face. Hell yes. My paranormal experience at Circus in Las Vegas. First off, yes, I know it isn't the nicest hotel in the Strip to stay, but I was there with a friend and their family. The first night, everything was normal. But the second night, when my friend and I took over the suite their 2 family members had used the first night, they had to take off early to leave, but they booked their room for 2 nights. The first weird thing was that in the suite, there's always another room attached by a door. But this instant was weird. The door into the other side of the suite was locked. We looked under it because we thought we heard a noise coming from it. Mind you, we were at the end of a hallway, so there was no other rooms connected to ours, other than what was supposed to be an extra suite room. So I looked under the door, and it looked like no one had been in there to clean up in ages. From what I could see, dresser drawers were partially open and astray. There was a shampoo bottle on the floor and what almost looked like rat droppings. It looked like the room hadn't been touched in a long time for whatever reason. I got sort of excited because I know the circus is very haunted. The part of our room had 2 beds, so my friend took one and I took the other, the bed facing the weird door. Everything had been normal all evening. We were mostly out exploring the hotel and the casino area, and when we came to bed, I looked under that door that should have been accessible to our room, and to my surprise, more of the drawers had been opened and some shut. We both thought it was super strange, seeing as our room was at the end of a hallway. This door from our main room was the only access to it. We carried on and got ready for bed when around 2:45 a.m, I was abruptly woken up by my blankets being yanked up over my legs, and there was a shadowy figure. I thought it was my friend playing a prank on me. I immediately turned my bedside light on and saw my friend was sleeping. I woke him up and told him what happened, and we were both pretty freaked out. I know reports of ghosts yanking blankets off of people have been reported at this hotel. Did all my research on the way there, lol. And I had a hard time going back to sleep. I noticed when we had first come back into the room that night, I felt a darker energy. I'm very sensitive to the paranormal and have had more experiences than I can count. I heard some scratching noises coming from the other room, which also delayed my sleep. I ended up taking a nice little edible to go back to bed. We woke up the next morning and discussed what had happened the night before, and it was pretty exciting. As creepy as it was, lol. Definitely one of the more haunted hotels on the strip. Earlier today, I wanted to get out of the house. It's been raining here for almost a week off and on. So once I saw it was going to be sunny, I decided we should go to the beach. I left my phone behind, which isn't unusual because I have a habit of dropping it at the beach or on hikes. This comes up later. We get to the beach and park, and I see a dog in a car parked near us, and I call my girlfriend to show her. As she approaches her phone, rings and I see on the caller ID my name and number. She asked if I had pocket dialed her, and instinctively I reached for my heaviest pocket, which had my wallet in. But I remembered I left my phone. I stop cold and tell her my phone is on the couch at home. She picks up and hears a deep voice speaking through static. I have a very deep voice, but she told me she couldn't tell who it was or what it was saying before it hung up. She calls back and rings it twice and goes to voicemail. I'm freaked out now because when we first met years ago, I had just moved to this town and I saw myself on the street jogging. I ended up chasing this person but couldn't catch them. I kept yelling trying to get their attention, but they just kept going, putting more and more distance between us. I stopped and some nearby people commented on my twin I was racing. This further cemented what I saw. It was 100% me I was chasing. Now this. When we got home, my call log didn't have the history of a call outgoing or the call she returned. Any thoughts on this or my other experience? And has anyone had any experiences like this? I live in a historic mining town. I think my house was built in the 70s, but I'm pretty sure there was another much older home in the same spot before this manufactured home was delivered here. It's a small lot, and there are areas of the yard where grass grows funny, like there's another foundation buried. Anyway, I have a couple things that have happened since moving here about 5 years ago. When I was digging a garden, I found half of a gun buried, like split in half, looked very old and rotted. Turned it into the police, never heard back about it. I have a friend that is in tune with spirits and paranormal things. She's not very comfortable with my basement at all, and says whatever it is that's down there just isn't a very nice entity. Once, I was up in the middle of the night in my living room. Had a strange feeling that the front door was going to open for some reason. Then I see my cat very slowly slinking towards the front door. Lo and behold, the door very slowly creaked open. Jumped up, locked and deadbolted it. Never happened again. One day, I was up at about 3 a.m. for whatever reason. Smoke detector in the basement started sounding. I didn't smell any fire, so I felt the basement door. Didn't feel heat, so I opened the door. Didn't see anything, so I turned the lights on and went down to check it out. Nothing. Checked out the smoke detector, pulled it off of the ceiling, and it was full of water. What the fuck? Checked my boiler system and water pipes. Not one sign of a leak. Had to replace that smoke detector from the mysterious water damage. Few years later, the same exact occurrence. Started sounding in the basement. Went and checked it out again. Nothing except a beeping smoke detector. No water this time though. I was playing around with one of those talk to spirits apps. Didn't think it was real. One day, my cat started acting funny, so I pulled the app out. It was pretty late at night again. I asked if anyone was here a couple times. Didn't get a response. But all of a sudden, the smoke detector in the hallway, which was near me,
started doing the low battery beep, like it just chose that exact moment for the battery to die. Got a little frustrated with these battery-operated smoke detectors and installed a commercial system with intelligent smoke detectors. One day, I was working from home and the keypad in the living room started beeping. Went to check it out, the keypad says, "Trouble in system, basement smoke." As soon as I read it, the keypad stopped beeping and it went back to normal. The system is monitored with a resistor, so for whatever reason, there was a drop in resistance in the wiring that goes to the basement smoke detector, which is mounted in the same spot. I have a theory that an old mining home may have rested in this spot where the new home was placed, and that it may have tragically burned down with someone inside. It would explain the weirdness of the smoke alarm at least.